2022, the gathering was fracturing and scattering. Trying to find competitive content on YouTube was soul-shattering. 2023, the rebellion came on the scene, a new kind of flow to sink into your routine. How can we make an impact when all we see is casual? Max and Rick is coming in, bringing you something factual. Results-based analysis became our decree. Brewing and tuning competitive, finally what the people wanted to see. 2025, week MTG content, your days are numbered. We're coming to you live with episode 100.
It only places if it races. Comment below as we walk through episode 100 and the 5th week of Aetherdrift Standard. Alrighty, gang. Happy 100th episode. This week, we took a look at 11 major tournaments, analyzing 88 top 8 spots to see where the meta shook out. Now, burning its way to the top was Mono Red Aggro with 16 top 8 slots and 4 trophies. That's right, nearly 20% of all top 8 slots went to Mono Red and more than a third of all the trophies, Max. Get ready, because Red is heating up again.
It sure is. In second place, though, we find Dimir Tempo with 10 top 8s and 3 trophies of its own. Despite this feeling like meta churn, due to the fact that we were in a somewhat similar position going into Foundation Standard, we nonetheless see flex slot shifts worth noting, and we'll talk all about that in a moment.
Third place went to Esper Pixie, maintaining its presence at the top of the tier list for yet another week as the world keeps trying to push it out, but the solution just ain't that simple. 11 top 8s and 2 trophies kept it in the running once more, and consistency might as well be Pixie's middle name at this point, Max.
Yeah, rounding out tier 1 options this week is Jeskai Oculus, fresh off a major victory in Japan with 6 top 8s and a single trophy.
Kicking off tier 2, we have Golgari Midrange pulling off 5 top 8s and a trophy of its own. While this archetype routinely gets wedged between a rock and a hard place with domain still around, pun intended, it nonetheless finds a path through at the occasional tourney.
And 6th place goes to Omni Combo. Woof, 9 top 8s and a trophy. Now this build keeps flipping flex slots, but will that be enough to push back against the hate? We'll discuss more in a bit.
Zur's Domain falls to 7th place in this week's tier list, notching only 6 top 8s over the course of the week and not one piece of hardware. Better luck next time for our overlords. I don't think that many of us are heartbroken about it, to be honest.
You're right. Boros Mice squeaks through for our final slot in the tier list with 3 top 8s, though once more no trophies in sight. This deck is looking to play against Mono Red all day long, so you can see why it's returning to the limelight at last.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'll be taking a look at Is It Monument and Dimir Demonic, one of which just smashed a major tournament of its own.
And I'll be highlighting Jeskai Control and Selesnya Aggro, both with top 8s this past week. Now, let's shift gears and fire off our tier list breakdown, starting with Mono Red Aggro.
MJ23 smashed through a 72-player MTGO challenge last Friday with Mono Red, cementing the deck's ascension to the top of the tier list, and let's look at what changed. I think what really stands out here is going to be the 3 Sunspine links in the main and that 4th copy sitting in the sideboard. We're just hedging hard for Domain, Pixie, Jeskai Oculus. As you can look at the tier list, you can notice that this is a really strong hedge given how many of those decks are sitting in the top 8, right? Outside of that, you've got 2 Urbasks Forge, and the first time I saw this, Max, I was looking at it and I'm like, Authority of the Consuls is still around, right? Like, why are we playing this deck? And then I realized nobody's playing Authority of the Consuls in their sideboard anymore, and Dimir's back. And if y'all remember what Dimir used to struggle with, it was Urbasks Forge, because all they had was Tishana's Tidebinder to keep it in check. And that didn't really do the trick all that often. Now, there's a 2-2 split on Lightning Strike and Witchstalker Frenzy. I think that's mostly because you think of Witchstalker Frenzy as not only a removal spell, but potentially a burn spell when you target your own nemesis with it. So you get kind of that reach that you were worried about beforehand anyway.
Right, and speaking of Witchstalker Frenzy, we look at it, it looks like a 4-drop on paper, but of course it's generally a cheaper spell than that. We do, however, have 3 4-drops. 21 lands as well here. Is 21 lands correct according to the Frank Carson math, or do we need more lands?
Yeah, this is playing high risk, right? Like, this is a red deck that is saying we're not trying to hit 90th percentiles on hitting our 4-drop on turn 4. I don't know that I agree with all of it, to be honest with you. If I could change one card in that list, I'd take that second Witchstalker Frenzy and flip it to another Soulstone Sanctuary so that we have 22 lands and we still maintain our threat base by doing so. So that's where I'd go with it. Like, this is typically how you handle flooding, is you have spell lands, right? Like Soulstone Sanctuaries, etc. Things you can sink mana into if you've got just nothing else to do. So that's where I would go, because 22 lands to me feels like the base of red at this point, with all these Sunspine Lynxes that just need to hit the battlefield.
I think that's a great point there. The Soulstone is definitely the solution here. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about by now, of course, the Frank Carson math, how likely are you to hit the top of your curve? That's really what we're discussing here. And for more info on that, be sure to join the Rebellion Discord below. We have great information on competitive Magic, including that article as well. But let's shift gears over to a deck that I'm honestly surprised to see back, but also kind of not, just because of where the meta is. Dimir Tempo.
Strong Mind took down a 73-player MTGO challenge on Saturday with Dimir Tempo, taking down Dimir Demonic in the finals of that. And to be honest, they also made it to the finals of another challenge, so they were like back-to-back over the course of the week. This is the build that did it. I love the way they position this. This is really clever. For those who don't know, like 3 Preachers and 3 Tishanas are pretty standard right now in Dimir, but the 2-1 split on Preacher to Tishana shows you that there's a soft hedge against aggro. Similarly, you see that 1 Shelly in the main, that 1 Gix's Command in the main, that 1 Anoint with Affliction in the main. Those are all, again, soft hedges against aggro, because this deck knows it's going to play mono red at least a few rounds in the tournament, but it's also going to play against, Domain. It's going to take on Esper Pixie. So it's not super hard hedged for any one archetype, but it's got soft hedges in all the right places with the ability to shore up the matchup post-board. For instance, you see that 3rd Preacher on the board. You see those Tishana Tidebinders 2 and 3 on the board. You see that 2nd Gix's Command on the board. That 2nd Anoint with Affliction on the board. That is a lot of soft hedges that shift the way the deck functions against the most important archetypes, and it's extremely balanced.
Yeah, interesting. I'm used to seeing Dimir bounce. Honestly, Dimir Tempo deck is a classic. I mean, the way it tries to function, it's really fallen by the wayside in the era of Pixie versus Domain versus Red. But what has shifted in the meta to allow this deck back into Tier 1?
The meta slowed down a little bit, but most importantly, Gruul Mice fell off a cliff. Right? With Gruul Mice disappearing, this deck got a lot better, because Gruul Mice was one of the few aggro decks that could outgrind and outposition and outrace. Like, it had all 3 of those abilities, because they were going into the Pop Hatch recruits, they were going into Innkeeper's Talent, they were making it incredibly difficult to interact with them in a favorable way. So this was a deck that got destroyed because of that. But now that Gruul Mice has been pushed out by Pixies, Domain, Mono Red, everybody hedging for it, this comes back and it says, okay, so Domain's in the format, eh? Well, that's our natural predator, so like let's do it. Let's get after it.
Yeah, and of those 3, right, we're not seeing Domain in Tier 1, but we are seeing Esper Pixie and Mono Red Aggro. So let's go ahead and shift gears over to Esper Pixie and talk about why.
Misplaced Ginger won a 37-player MTGO challenge on Saturday with Esper Pixies, continuing this archetype stay at the top. And let's look at their build, because this is becoming kind of the stock build with all these stock ups, right? You've got 4 stock ups in this list, 3 in the main, so that 3-2 split of stock up over Kaido has solidified now as the correct way to go. And it makes sense when you consider that Kaido is really poorly positioned against the aggro decks. Like, you don't want to draw that against mono red. They're going to kill it on the swing back basically every time. So unless you're getting additional value from the creature you're bouncing with it, it's rough against red. Whereas stock up is just saying, all right, you're playing against red, removal spell, stock up, grab 2 more removal spells, do it again. Like, that's kind of the point of stock up, is it's just that dig through time with different restrictions. You also see that there's a 24th land. We've got another basic in there. We've got an island. I think that this has gotten a little bit grindier now that we're in the stock up builds. You're regularly seeing these games happen where we have Storm Chaser's Talent bringing back stock up to keep grinding for value. And with that, you'll notice that Overlord of the Baelmerk is gone, as his temporary lockdown. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating, especially considering we're seeing this deck have to slow down just a little bit, even when it's dealing with aggro, right? It wants to grind them down and then go over the top. Seemingly that's what it wants to do anyway. But considering the rise of other, sort of mid-rangey archetypes like, Dimir, is pest control worth the slots in the sideboard?
I mean, it's hard to argue with the results, right, Max? Because Misplaced Ginger has put together a hell of a resume playing pest control, but at the same time, I'm just not a huge fan. I don't love where pest control is positioned in this deck. I don't know that I agree with it, considering the tension points that it has. I'm aware that it can help in the mirror. I'm aware that it can help against mono red. It can also be awkwardly positioned in both of those and unnecessary in both of those. So unless Convoke is making a resurgence or something else that's swarming at like 1 mana, I don't love pest control.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We're not seeing Swarm in the meta, not like we used to. So it's tough to make an argument for pest control. There's always room for improvement, right? Even if you are showing results, there's always ways to shift and be even better. So I don't know. I'm going to argue that's one of those slots that we could tune. It might be a little bit of a flex slot. In any event, let's talk about a deck that has only been in tier 1 for just a little while. I'm surprised to see this one, Jeskai Oculus.
Apologies if I butcher the name. Imai Kenta took down the 176-player Champions Cup qualifier in Tokyo this past Friday with Jeskai Oculus, rounding out our Tier 1 archetypes by making us all question whether the Eye in the Sky is still viable. So let's look at where things have shifted here. I think the most important shift that has become commonplace now is the addition of 2 Kitsa Otterball Elite. I love that this is around. I didn't know if this would ever find a place or a home in Standard that mattered, but this is the deck for it. I mean, this is a deck that absolutely loves being able to filter through its options, and occasionally you're going to get that second ability going. But in many ways, Max, this feels to me a lot like it's Drake Hatcher, but it was made specifically for Oculus. You know, that ability to filter while still having vigilance and prowess makes this very difficult to get off the battlefield if you don't have a Lithomantic Barrage. Let's also note that 6 reanimation slots seems to be the sweet spot with 4 Helping Hand and 2 Recommission. The 4 Profts are also stabilizing, which makes sense because this is our plan B. You know, if they're like turn 1 Ghost Vacuum, there are hands where we just ignore that and we go, don't care, Spyglass Iron, Profts, now let's just draw as many cards as we can with Steam Core Scholars, right?
Yeah, and thinking back to the Atlanta Spotlight series, when we were also kind of thinking about running Azorius Oculus or testing with it pretty heavily, I think one of the issues, right, Drake Hatcher wasn't enough of a plan B. I think this iteration of the deck has enough of a plan B with Proft, with the Otterball Elite, to be able to push through just in case of the graveyard hate. So interesting to see those additions to the deck since then. But talk about a deck that's definitely diversified its strategy. This one has for sure. Let's talk about a piece in the sideboard though. Chandra, has that card earned your respect as a sideboard slot?
Yes, but I'm not sure we want 3. I'll put it that way. Like, I think this deck definitely wants at least 1 in the sideboard. I could see 2. 3 starts to get to a point where I don't know. Like, this is a narrower card than I think a lot of people are understanding. Part of the purpose of this card is to give you that 4-drop walker that explodes against control, that makes it very difficult for Domain to contain because it's going to auto 2-for-1 them, and you're going to get haste, right? And that's kind of the point of this card, is that you're going to get hasty threats, you're going to get to beat down, and you're going to do it from an angle that doesn't get hit by Wrath of God effects. So I like it for diversification of your threat base for plan B, but 3 copies feels like we are embracing this plan and saying this is the only goddamn way we're going to get there. And I don't like that for this, because I think I want something that plays better with Profts as an additional option so that we can really push that momentum through like Phoenix has done in the past.
All right, and that's not the last time we're going to be talking about Chandra Spark Hunter this episode, so stay tuned in. I will bring this card back up later. But for now, let's shift into Tier 2, where I'll kick things off with Golgari Midrange. So, Golgari Midrange making a surprise reappearance to the meta. We thought the Annex decks were dead, right? But Chuko smashed through a 59-player MTGO challenge on Thursday with Golgari Midrange, keeping the archetype relevant for yet another week. And let's talk about why. We've got 3 copies of the Unholy Annex in here, 3 copies of Soulstone to go with it, 2 Arcfiends, and 1 Speed Demon. So that's new to the deck, the Speed Demon. Is it Demon time again? Are we back? Who knows? This deck certainly did make Tier 2. So 3/3 Preacher to Sentinel split. Really a good way to hit back against the Pixie, the Bounce, the Aggro archetypes. My question, though, for this list, because a lot of the same sort of slots that we saw, Maelstrom Poles, we're seeing Terra Sunder in the main. We're seeing some of the same things that we saw when the deck left. My big question, though, is do we still need the 2 copies of Choking Miasma in the sideboard? Are we dealing with Swarm strategies the way we were? I would say no. So I think that's also a point of contention where we could kind of tune in, flex in something else to deal with the meta.
Absolutely. Now, I look at this and we call it Golgari Midrange. It's demons. It's kind of a mixture between the two. It's not full-on demons like the old builds that were like 4 Annex, 4 Arcfiend, but it's got a demon sub-plan, which is new for the archetype to be pushing that instead of Thruns at the top end, because perhaps that's just a stronger play with where we're at grinding and how slow the format's become now. That said, we've also seen a minor emergence of Dimir Demons, aka Dimir Demonic.
Right.
Do you think that Golgari is stronger than Dimir, and if so, why?
This used to be a question, right? Because we saw both a Dimir Demons and a Golgari Demons at about the same time a few months back. I still personally like both decks, right? Because Annex, to me, is a really good draw engine. But I think Dimir presents an issue for the decks that typically cause this deck, the Golgari mid-range deck, problems, like, Domain and Control. We're seeing that Jace Demon combo come in to try to mill them out. It honestly might just be an apples and oranges comparison at this point, with that being the way that Dimir Demonic wants to go. Since these decks are really tackling different sides of the meta, this particular Golgari Demons deck tends to beat out the other decks to try to resource you and the low curve aggro stuff that's out there right now, whereas that deck is more built to beat Control, Domain, those kinds of decks. So I think they're tackling two different sides of the meta, and if you're deciding between them, pick according, again, to your local meta. That's a constant refrain here, but pay attention to what people are playing at your LGS, what people are playing in your region, and decide accordingly.
Now, you make a good point. If you're seeing all Pixies mono red and whatnot, then Golgari looks a lot better. And if you're seeing nothing but Domain and Azorius Control, Dimir probably looks better. So, no, I'm with you, Max. That makes a lot of sense to me. But for a deck that neither of them really planned on dealing with, let's talk about Omniscience.
Oh, boy. So Zio Francone won the 87-player MTGO challenge on Monday with Omni Combo, introducing some minor shifts in the design, though, so we got to talk about them. We are seeing Season of Weaving and Unnerving Grasp back in the sideboard. Sunder the Gateway is gone. That was one sort of way to win. We are still seeing Grand Abolisher. It's up to 3 copies now in the sideboard. We're also seeing a full set of Temporary Lockdown in the main board now, and that just tells you, what we're hedging against. We're trying to tempo the low curve aggro, tempo the Pixie decks. We are seeing 1 copy of Defabricate making an appearance again. The many modes on this card seem to be effective against the meta right now. And full set of Riptide Gearhulks back in the sideboard. I do like this card sort of as an alternate win con, a way to, perpetually, be aggressive with a combo deck. It's very interesting, and the Gearhulks present that dynamic to it. So I do like the Gearhulks. I do like where this deck is positioned. Season of Weaving just felt kind of like a natural fit, so it was odd to see it go last week. I think it just makes sense to have Season of Weaving in the deck.
That's fair. Now, when we look at the sideboard and the way we want to combo max, that's really where I see a lot of variance. Do you want to do Sunder the Gateway? Do you want to do Season Weaving and Unnerving Grasp? Personally, I'm all about Beseech the Mirror, This Town Ain't Big Enough, and Breach the Multiverse as the win con. Where do you stand on it?
I think you bring up a good alternate here. I could see that being the combo, and the reason I'll say maybe you want to run that over this is because that win con honestly just requires less hand cramps, less carpal tunnel. You're doing it in less steps. Breach also has this this interesting side benefit of allowing us to look through the opponent's deck, like if it's game 1. If they don't scoop, if they don't concede in time, being able to know how to side and how to go post board, that's a huge advantage, honestly, that people don't think about. But of course, both combos could be disrupted equally at the same points, by similar cards. I don't see much difference between them functionally, other than those 2 factors. So if those are important factors to you, if you're running out of time a lot with this deck, then you may want to consider running, different win cons.
And a mill win con is hard to deal with. There just aren't that many ways to get around that. Speaking of a deck that hates to see a mill win con coming, let's talk about Zer's Domain.
Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Mac 12, 17, 11 got all the way to the finals in a 2-player MTGO challenge last Tuesday on the back of Domain before falling to Dimir Tempo in the finals. Not surprised there. But let's take a look here at some of the shifts. We're seeing 3 up from 2 analyze the pollens now. I think this signifies that we need to get to our combo cards, get to our Zor much more quickly and much more reliably. The deck has a little bit less inevitability now that we have these other decks that come in and just tear our hands and tear our libraries apart for the cards that we need. They tend to disrupt us with more regularity. So I can understand 3 Analyze the Pollen, 3 lockdowns in the main, 2 Days of Judgment, 0 Sunfall. Let me say that again. 0 Sunfall. Sunfall is the card that helps you draw off beans a lot of times, so you wanted to run that in the past. I think it's just become more important to get to the board wipe as quickly as possible. I'm honestly surprised not to see something that I run in my domain build, Stonebrain or Ancient Vendetta. This is something that I started to notice in other decks against domain, try to, bring out the cards that you need like Zur, but I think if you use it on the opponent, especially if as you're seeing like control decks, Omni Combo, that card could be quite beneficial. So I'd like to see more copies of those in future domain sideboards at least.
That's fair. Now, I mean, we look at that final matchup, Domain falls to Dimir Tempo. Do we think that Domain can be structured to beat Dimir Tempo Max, or is that just the kryptonite for this list and that it is what it is?
I think it can beat that matchup. It just has to hedge more against it, build a little bit against it. We're still dealing in any blue color deck with Jace and sideboards, still sort of the Achilles heel of Domain in a lot of ways. And Dimir Colors, of course, takes full advantage of it by having, those aggressive draw engines, Kaido. Kaido's an aggression piece that board wipes can't get rid of, so you have to do something about Kaido. It just can't face down the Dimir mid-range the same way they used to dominate the Golgari mid-range matchup. You can't think of them as the same anymore. We are starting to see 2 copies of Get Lost in the main of a lot of these decks, and that's a start. The wide sort of targets that hits. But I still think that we need to run like 2 to 3 Tidebinders at least in the sideboard as well to help against the Planeswalkers, to help against those sorts of cards. Maybe some copies of Negate. I don't know. There are certainly things you can do if you're willing to, again, pay attention to your local meta. Maybe you don't need, copies of Frillback or copies of Obstinate Baloth, or, there are some things that you can do to adjust according to the meta. So if you're facing down a lot of those decks, you might want to consider where you're hedging against aggro to hedge against those instead.
I'm with you on that front. I think the key to Dimir Tempo is being able to interact at instant speed, and you've got a lot of really clunky temporary lockdowns, Day of Judgments, Bezas. These are all cards that are great against a lot of the format, but against Dimir, it's brutal. So,
yeah,
I mean, how many times have we listened to Athena tell us this week that it's a Tidebinder format and we need to get on board? Like, at least twice. At least twice.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That said, let's look at a deck that is super hard hedged to beat number 1 right now, Mono Red, and that is Boros Mice.
Ozawa Naoya made it to the top 8 of the 176-player Champions Cup qualifier in Tokyo last Friday with Boros Mice, really breathing fresh air into a long dead archetype, and let's see why. Look, I'm just going to say it. If Mono Red is on top, it makes sense that a red-based deck slaying to beat red would come back as well. That's just, sometimes you need a criminal to beat a criminal. I don't know. You just do sometimes. So that's what this deck is trying to do. I'm going to mention the Spicy Edition, Seedglaive Mentor. I really just discounted this card. I never looked at this card as a possible addition to this archetype until you consider that, once it's souped up, Nowhere to Run doesn't hit it. So that, Monstrous Rage, Shard Mages Rescue it. You get out of Nowhere to Run range. And that was one of the main arguments for why I didn't play this card was Nowhere to Run. But, when you consider in conjunction with those cards, it's a possibility. We're also seeing Chandra in the sideboard of this one. And to me, that makes sense considering this is a low-curve aggro deck that wants to be able to preserve itself against board wipes. Vehicles and Planeswalkers are a way to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd also note that Seedglaive Mentor has Vigilance, which is, in a world filled with Ride's End, oh so spicy.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to go, no, this is a 5/4 with Vigilance swinging right at you. And it's got haste, too. Like, it's got a lot of stuff that I think was overlooked initially, and this was such a spicy list, I just had to include it for that alone.
Absolutely.
Speaking of spicy lists, though, let's go ahead and get over to Brewer's Corner, favorite segment every week, and let's kick things off and talk a little bit about Jeskai Control.
All right, Jeskai Control, Kiyo Musakido, top 8 at Majisudo 18th day. Look, Jeskai Control, we're going to be seeing a lot more of this archetype. That's my prediction here, especially as Tarkir comes out. There are some cards, I'm not going to reveal any, but there are some cards that make me think that Jeskai Control is going to be an archetype. This is mostly Azorius colors. We're going red for the Lightning Helixes, the Broadside Barrages, right? So those direct damage cards. Iconoclast in the sideboard also is a 3-0 for the alternate win con. I do like where that's positioned. This is essentially a control deck, like Azorius Control uses 3 copies of 3 steps ahead, uses Refute to counter, And those cards also have the side benefit of helping you to find more spells. So that's very important in a control archetype. Speaking of digging like that, we also have 7 3-mana value spells for when we get the chance to cast them. We've got Stock Up at sorcery speed, and we've got Quick Study at instant speed. So let's not forget about Quick Study. And that of course is going to help us to dig for what we need. Riptide Gearhulk is present here as well. It's got a prowess ability that I think comes into play here when you consider the number of spells that you're casting. And really the icing on the cake, I have to mention this, Voracious Great Shark is a 3-of. Who saw this coming? Lockhorned Whale who? This card bites.
I love it. I love it. I mean, honestly, I look at that list and I think with a little tuning, it's going to be a lot stronger. Like we've got a glut of 3-drops. We definitely got to cut back on that. But like the core concept, Max, it's got some strength, and especially with Dragonstorm getting spoiled and some interesting options for Jeskai coming in there, I'm with you. I think this archetype could have some juice, and that's a good starting spot to take it from. But let's talk a little bit about the next one on the list. Is it Monument? Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and credit the MTGA ladder with playing this against me and making me do a double take about 3 different times during the first few games, trying to figure out how the hell all of this was working. But welcome to control that doesn't need creatures and doesn't really want them, if we're being frank. It's all about just using Monument to Endurance. Now, a few tricks here. Mycosynth Gardens becomes Monument at instant speed on their end step. That's quite something. Ill-Timed Explosion. You don't mind discarding a 7-mana spell to ill-timed and blowing up the board. That's pretty spicy. It also gives you a secondary draw engine and some early removal. It's perfectly positioned here. Artist Talent has never been stronger than this deck, in my opinion. This is one that just seamlessly works with Monument to Endurance to keep on churning. And as the game goes on, leveling it up ain't half bad either. In the meantime, you have a ton of early removal. You've got counters as the game wears on. And my own spice was adding in a Ral here and 3 Jaces in that sideboard. So I think this needs a lot of tuning still, obviously, but the base concept intrigues the hell out of me, and I think it's a good starting place yet again to mess with.
Absolutely. Izzet Colors has the tools right now to tackle the meta the way it's positioned. So I like where this idea is positioned, and I love the idea of Monument decks just being on the outside creeping in.
Hell yeah.
But
and with that, let's roll over and talk a little bit about Selesnya Aggro.
I almost jumped the gun there. I want to talk about this deck. You know me. I love aggressively piloted decks, and this Selesnya Aggro intrigues. Aid Mashaloid, top 8 at Machisudo 18th day. This is essentially Cage without the combo, a little bit more aggressive instead. We have the 4 bright-ass Gearhulks here to fetch a suite of cool 1-drop spells. We've got Lava Spur Boots, Goldvein Hydra, which I bet you didn't think of, Fungus, in case we need it, Basilisk Collar, Paw Patch. I mean, there's a good suite of spells here that you can go and fetch. Malira is also present here as a 3-up to protect your critical pieces, like the Gearhold. Velocipede and Tristani supplement your aggression by adding to the creatures that you have on board, making them more powerful. Liege is here as a 2-of in the main and also in the sideboard. Read it like a Baloth, but in a Selesnya shell. You've got the possible double Anthem effect here as well. So that's really cool. These are all really good spells, just mashed together in an archetype that wants to be aggressive. The only thing I would add, possibly, maybe you add like a 1 or 2 of Clay Champion. That's another card that people have forgotten about as well. This deck intrigues me as something I'd really like to pursue as an aggressive Magic player myself. So I expect to see me on ladder with this one.
As long as we get to rename Bright Glass Gearhulk into Bright Ass Gearhulk, I'm in. 100% in for that. But moving right along to the next Gearhulk, let's talk about Dimir Demonic. So, Flesh-Eating Gnome, hell of a name, won MTGO Challenge on Tuesday, taking down Mono Red Leyline with this beautiful pile. It's back. We've seen rumors, we've heard rumors that this was going to be a thing again. We weren't sure, but Stock Up brought it back. We finally have the card that goes and finds the missing pieces without disrupting everything else. And that's what this deck got. Also, this is finally the home of Oil Deep Gearhulk. I played a few matches with this. This was the deck that wanted it. Of all the Dimir archetypes, this is the most mid-rangey that also has a kind of combo sitting in it. And this was the missing piece. It didn't have a nice 4-drop that helped prevent your opponent from interacting while simultaneously presenting a threat that aggro had to deal with. and this just filled all those slots perfectly. I really like where this base concept went. I'm going to say straight up, I don't believe this is the right build, but it's really close. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in Ahead of the Curve here.
All right, awesome. Well, let's get to it, because I'm excited about the deck I want to talk about as well.
Hell yeah. That is going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Max, we looked at 12 archetypes in our recap, per usual. So talk to me. What are you going to be playing going into Week 6 of Aetherdrift Standard?
All right, I'm going to throw a curveball here. Let's look at Gruul Vehicles. Gruul Vehicles, you might be thinking I'm talking about 2023 Pioneer, but I am not. I assure you, I'm talking about 2025 Standard here. Credit to Neb12R for taking down MTGO Standard League with his 5-0 result last week. This list is aggressive in all the right places, in my opinion, for the meta. You know, you're going to have that fast Llanowar Elf start ramping into some great 3-drops. We've got, 4 copies of Torch, 4 copies of Burst Lightning here to supplement what we're doing. Paw Patch, if you don't get to destroy an enchantment with it or anything with it, you can do that third mode. You get that food token. That saves up for a Bristleblood later. Those work well together. 4 copies of Sentinel, presenting problems for the low curve aggro decks. Full set of Tender Wild Gods for some serious ramp advantage here, and you're going to want that. We've got a full set of Chandra, Spark Hunter here. I already said vehicles dodge board wipes. This one is also here to activate the 3 copies of Lumbering World Wagons for some serious aggression and even more ramp. What are you ramping to? Well, we've got a couple of copies of Nissa here, and you're doing that for the flavor. Chandra and Nissa are lovers, but also because this card really top ends and finishes off what you're trying to do with all that aggression. And I just have to mention real quick the 4 Sunspines in the sideboard. I think that card is starting to become a staple against some of these 3-color, these domain decks. Overall, I think this deck intrigues me because it's both aggressive and it takes aim at a meta that has really pushed out creature-based aggressive game plans. But, that's enough of that for me. I know you're excited to talk about this next deck. I turn to you, Rictus. How are you getting ahead of the meta this weekend?
Well, first and foremost, I want to take that Chandra Spark Hunter and have an alt art done where it's got a blunt and it goes Chandra Sparks Blunt, and it just alt art it right into that. But
Spark Blunter.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes. It needs to be done.
Oh,
that's all
man.
I'm saying. I don't know if it's going to be for me, but
it.
it should be done. Anyway, I'm on Dimir Demonic this week. Let's talk about it. Okay, I know a lot of people are on 3 Undercity sewers here. I don't like having that many tap lands when you're already running the 4 Restless Reef, and this is a deck that needs all 4 Restless Reef because that is an alt win if you don't have the Jace. If you just have Doomsday plus Restless Reef swing once, that's usually enough. So, yeah, I didn't put them in. I went for the 4th Darkslick Shore, the 4th Underground River, and the 2nd Fabled Passage instead, which I like Fabled Passage here in particular. Little mana thinning while simultaneously allowing you to hit whichever source you need. You're a lot higher on basics. Your Sunspine links, opponents aren't quite as happy with you there either. Clearly, given that this is 6 black mana, we can only have 1 non-black producing land in the entire deck. But outside of that, let's talk about where we shifted a few other pieces. Now, personally, if you look at the curve like so, where you have the Jaces in the same curve as this, you have exactly 10 3-drops. That's perfect for curve purposes. 4, 3, 2, also perfect for curve purposes now. And then in the sideboard, you see that there's 3 Preacher of the Schism now. We've kind of shifted things around slightly. But the last piece I'm going to talk about on this before I let this go, first and foremost, we're not doing the Bailoffs. I don't think it makes sense. Pixies on Dreams of Steel and Oil just doesn't make sense. I do think that we need to have those Preachers, but you'll notice that deck list, it only has 14 cards in the sideboard. So if you're watching and you're trying to figure it out, comment below with what you think should be there. I'm really curious what you think that 15th slot in the sideboard should be. And outside of that, the sideboard guide for the 74 that is present is already in Coffee and Grinders for all our members. So thank you.
All right, and that about does it. Another week in the books, folks. Thank you for joining us on this, our 100th episode. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to bring back competitive analysis to the MTG content meta here on YouTube these past 2 years. It's been sorely needed, and we're happy to provide that service for you. But here's to more years raising hell with you, Rictus. Let's go.
Chin chin. You know, when we hit landmarks such as this, I take a look at how far we've come. Now, this all started as a dream, but it's coalesced into a reality that you, our community, have embraced. So thank you for taking this journey with us. Thank you for helping us revitalize the competitive scene. and we appreciate having all of you here. Max, cheers to more years. We've got a lot to unveil before 2025 is over, and I can't do it without my partner. Also, a quick shout out to Icy PJs, our rebel queen and the genius behind all these beautiful graphics that you can see on your screen.
We love you, girl.
We do. Until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.